I read really broadly. I still read, I read lit fic. I read a ton of mysteries and detective novels, as you can probably tell from my latest work. I read romance all the time. I read nonfiction, although not as much, but I do. And one thing I really admire too in other writers is writers who are able to work with really different approaches. So, like China Miéville is one, maybe. The one I think about a lot as an example of this is a Catalan writer who writes in Spanish, Eduardo Mendoza, who's written like really like sort of epic historical fiction and kind of wild, silly comedy books and like short poetic little novellas, and just like in terms of mode, it's such variety, and I just find that very appealing. And I think as I find it appealing as a reader, and then as a writer, um, I mean, I'm just someone who is kind of peripatetic. Like I'm always moving around, trying different things, wanting to think about something different. I often now not as much because I'm so I've got other things that I'm doing between teaching and Global Voices and other kinds of work, and that gives me the variety I need. But when I was just the times when I have had more time for writing, I tended to have like 2 or 3 manuscripts that I was really working on at a time, because I wanted to have, one that felt a little lighter and one that felt more intense and one that was first person and felt very interior and one that was more action. Because if I got a little stuck on one, I'd just go to the other and just find the pleasure points in each one.
What is up, everybody? You're listening to episode 160 of SFF Addicts. I'm your host, Adrian M. Gibson, and welcome to your weekly dive into the world of science fiction, fantasy, and writing craft. Joining me this week is my co-host, my bestie from the Midwestie, the queen of my days, Greta Kelly. How are you, Greta?
I'm good. How are you doing, Adrian?
Doing well. And if you want to support my Queen of Days by buying her book, The Queen of Days, or The Frozen Crown, or The Seventh Queen thing, go check that out for some fun heist action and some lovable idiots doing their thing.
Lovable idiots messing up. And of course, go support Adrian and check out Mushroom Blues for your dose of murder, mayhem, and of course, mushrooms. It's out now wherever you buy books.
And our other co-host, MJ, in her quest to quit her day job, needs your support. So go buy Among Thieves, book 1 in the Tales of Tomorrow-duology, and support her cat. Cat's plural. She has a new kitten. Of them now. Yeah, she's got a new kitten. So go feed those kitties.
Yeah, go check out Instagram to see MJ's new kitten. She's adorable.
Although I don't know if in her stories, I think she's setting them to private. So,
oh, okay.
Yeah, but there is a kitten. You might find her. It's all good. As well, a quick note for listeners, you can support SFF Addicts on Patreon for a ton of cool extras, including bonus episodes, author readings, and more. So check the links in the description to support what we do here. And don't forget to rate and review the podcast on your favorite podcast app, and subscribe to the FanFiAddict YouTube channel, where this and every other episode of the show is available in full video. And a quick patron shout out to our newest patron, Morgan Ryan, friend of Greta and author of A Resistance of Witches. Thanks for supporting us on Patreon.
Thank you so much.
Now, welcome back to SFF Addicts, Malka Older, author of The Sentinel Cycle, The Investigations of Mossa and Pleiti, and more, including her newest release, The Potency of Ungovernable Impulses. Welcome back, Malka. How are you?
Thanks. It's good to be here. Yeah, I'm doing good. And I know those titles are a mouthful.
I know. I was like, I was trying to practice beforehand.
I was doing the same thing. I'm like, how does my mouth work over ungovernable?
Just think of me typing them out every time I want to.
You went so easy from like Infomocracy. And then
gotta work for it now.
Oh man, always gotta work for it. But it's okay. Very happy to have you back, Malka.
Thanks. It's really good to be here.
Before we dig deeper into the episode, a quick word from our sponsor. Welcome to Transference, where death and sickness are but a distant memory. Nicholas Five Boroughs is a sicko, someone that takes on others' illnesses. In a city where diseases can be transferred, the rich buy longer lives without pain, and the poor get a short life of constant sickness. Brought back from the brink of death by his friend Brian Meadowhearth, or maybe the invisible hand of an outside actor, Nick finally gets the chance to try and change things, to finally stop the whole disease transfer network. Tensions escalate as Nick infiltrates a higher society he doesn't understand, and starts to fall for Dorothy Sungate, the very person he needs to manipulate to be successful. And between run-ins with a talking cat, genetically modified humans, and a robotic police force, the world around him just keeps getting stranger. Can Nicholas tear down the disease transfer architecture? And how much of his humanity is he willing to bargain along the way? A dystopian vision of healthcare and a market economy, Transference will appeal to fans of Red Rising, Blade Runner, and the BioShock franchise. Soon to be a complete duology with the release of Transcendence in the summer of 2025. Transference by Ian Patterson is available now in paperback and ebook. Get your copy today. And now, enjoy the rest of this episode of SFF Addicts. All right, well, just to start off, we'll do a little bit more of an introduction if you want to give listeners and viewers who aren't familiar with you a little bit more info about yourself, your work, and whatnot.
Sure. So I am, as you said, the author of Infomocracy, which is a science fiction political thriller, and its sequels, Null States and State Tectonics, and the investigations of Mossa and Pleiti, which is sapphic murder mysteries set on Jupiter. Gas lamps SF, where the gas is piped directly from the writhing entrails of the planet. And apart from that, I am also I am a sociologist, and I study disasters and organizations, and also how we think about the future. And I teach at Arizona State University. And I also am the executive director of the nonprofit Global Voices, which brings community journalism from around the world, also does translation support for Indigenous languages and digital activism, and narrative analysis research, which is obviously very close to my heart.
Mm-hmm. And congrats on that, by the way, on that new position.
Thank you.
Very cool.
We always, I love hearing about that. Like, how did you get involved in that organization, and what inspires you to work in organizations like Global Voices?
So it was because of my books in large part. Although maybe I can go back and start earlier, because before I was publishing my writing, I was working in international NGOs as both development work and humanitarian response. So I worked in Darfur for a while, Sri Lanka, Sudan and Darfur, and Indonesia, Japan after the tsunami there. And then I kind of took a break to do my doctorate, and then I was able to start publishing, and just was trying to do a little less of the traveling and so on. But with my books, I donate 10% of what I earn from my books to something that's related to what the book is about. And that is partly, the kind of give back. I'm just so happy to be able to make money doing this thing that I love doing, and did for years and years and years without being able to make any money off of it whatsoever. So it's giving back, but also a big part of it is like, I'm writing these books that are set, depending on which series you're looking at, somewhere between 60 and hundreds of years into the future. And I really want there to be that connection with the things that are going on right now, because they really are about the problems that we're facing right now, even if they show them through this kind of funhouse mirror. And so being able to donate to organizations that are working on these issues, whether it's government integrity and information and statelessness with the Sentinel cycle, or whether it's environmental and biodiversity issues with the Mossa and Pleiti books, I hope that it gives readers a sense of like, this is also right now. And not only is it right now, but like, it's not just something that I read about. I have actually done something by buying these books, and there are other people who are doing something, working on this every day. So when I was looking for the nonprofit that I could donate to for State Tectonics, the last book in the Sentinel cycle, which is a book that's very much about sort of having news sources that are diversified and from all over, and not just one monolithic news source. And I came across Global Voices, which is has been around now for 20 years and started out kind of pulling together blogs from all over the world to give people a sense of what people were talking about in other places, no matter where you were at the time, somewhere else, and has evolved into having, editorial support and other efforts to make sure that these are stories that people are getting that lay out the context. If you're not familiar, give a sort of intersectional lens on what's going on and just share the things that people want to share, from local news stories to local perspectives on global news stories to culture and art and food and music from their places. And I love that. And I also think it's so important in the moment we're in right now to be aware of what other people are going through, to have that empathy that crosses borders, whether they're national borders or linguistic borders, or just the fact that, if we can watch news all the time and never hear about 99% of the people in the world and what their experience is. So yeah, I love working on it.
Oh, that's amazing. And honestly, like the fact that Global Voices does translation, I think that's probably because when I like a lot of stuff was happening here in Ecuador, especially last year, friends of mine would be asking like, where do I read about this? And I'd be like, well, actually, it's in Spanish for the most part. And so just the fact of language being a barrier to information, it's really good that Global Voices does something like translate work in order for people around the world to understand the more localized, nuanced discussions and understand what is happening in these places from the people who are actually there on the ground experiencing it. And just that translation is the only barrier, but Global Voices and a ton of other organizations as well help with that kind of thing. But it really sucks when it's like there's a possibility for connection, but then it's just like, oh, there's like a single thing that is limiting that the opening of that door, right? And I love the fact that through your creative work you're able to build a deeper connection for people to know that, like, by buying Malka's books, then you're also helping people out in, whether it has to do with environmental degradation, whether it has to do with political upheaval or that kind of stuff. It's really, really cool that readers can also have that connection through you and through your books. So I want to dig a little bit deeper into just like your inspirations for the books and movies or whatever that got you into science fiction and fantasy, or whatever kind of like spurred your desire to write and be able to write these stories that you can share with people.
Yeah, I mean, I was always like just an incredibly voracious reader as a kid. But I will say I did not only read science fiction and fantasy. I read everything, Anne of Green Gables and Lord of the Rings and The Black Stallion and occasionally Sweet Valley Twins and um,
I love it.
really a whole range of stuff. And um, so, I think also we were talking earlier about kind of how it's like the television environment for young people is very different now, right? Because you couldn't just look up back then whatever episode you wanted to watch. You had to just watch what was on, which is such a wild thing now. And I think for books too, like it was very different in terms of finding out what books were around for different ages and what you could read. Um, so yeah, I just had this very very broad eclectic reading, and among that was definitely science fiction. Um, I think, yeah, I mean, the Lord of the Rings was a huge influence on me, and I actually think it still is, even though when I read it now, I'm kind of there's some things that I see very, very differently. And not just even like plot and character stuff, but some of the narrative and craft choices as well. Um, but there's still a lot I appreciate about it, and definitely like the world building is something that I just think about a lot. I was also a big Star Wars fan as a kid, and obviously, like me and my brother now writes for them. Uh, so that's
Amazing.
Very cool.
yeah, it's kind of funny when that happens, but amazing. And so we were, very into those movies. Again, of course, at the time, you saw the movie in the theater, and then maybe it would be on TV like once a couple of years later, and then you waited for it to come around in the theater again. So it was a very different experience, but yeah, I love those.
So when did like writing and the desire to actually publish fiction and science fiction actually become something that you were like, you know what, I'm not waiting anymore. This is something I have to do?
Oh gosh, always. I mean, I always wrote like I always thought in my head in terms of chapter books and long story, novels, and I wrote them really in high school, wrote one or two, and then after in college and after college, like wrote them. I remember like I went and taught in Japan, taught English in Japan right after college, and I remember putting together these huge envelopes and sending them to agents in the US by post, which
Oh
was
my gosh.
experience and got me exactly nowhere. And even while I was working in doing humanitarian work, I was writing the whole time, and sometimes it was sometimes very discouraging not to be able to publish anything, but I was trying, and I kept writing, and I can imagine my writing got better. I have been too scared to go back and look, but I'm gonna say, it improved over that
I don't
period.
know anyone who's brave enough to actually go back
I
and
mean,
look at their first times.
so uh, and yeah, and then eventually, and I really like. There was actually a point when I took what I call a sabbatical from where I was also just really burned out from doing a lot of very intense work, and focused on writing for a couple of months and tried to and focused on quarrying for a couple of months, and did not manage to publish anything. And then finally, I got one story published at Tor.com, and kind of screwed up my courage and wrote to say, so are you interested in any more? And they said, well, we're booked up with stories for the year, but we're starting a novella program. You got anything? And that's what became Infomocracy, which is not a novella. I tried to sell it to them as like a standalone half of a duology, and they were like, "This really isn't standalone, but we can do novels." And yeah, it's just gone from there.
It worked out. It worked out.
Yeah.
But I mean that's kind of a perfect jumping off point to talk about mediums because, pitching Infomocracy as a novella. Um,
I was really desperate. I was really
yeah,
like,
yeah. Um, but I love that your writing has taken so many forms. It's like you've written full length novels and trilogies and poetry, short fiction, serial fiction. Actually, Ninth Step Station, which is something that you collaborated with on multiple other authors, is really one of my favorites. And speaking of Japan, if anyone wants some good like Japanese cyberpunk, that's a very good one to go with.
gosh, I love that
Um,
series, and it
it's
was so
so
much
good.
fun
It's
working
so
with
good.
Fran Wild, Jay Koyanagi, Curtis Chen. It was a great team, and we had a good time. Wish it was still going. I do not own the rights, so I do not have anything to say about the future of it. But you know, it was a really fun one to work on.
Very fun one to read too. So what is it about playing with different formats and different lengths that you enjoy? What kind of like attracts you as a writer to experiment with that kind of stuff?
Well, as I said, I read really broadly. I still read, I read lit fic. I read a ton of mysteries and detective novels, as you can probably tell from my latest work. I read romance all the time. I read nonfiction, although not as much, but I do. And I one thing I really admire too in other writers is writers who are able to work with really different approaches. So like China Mieville is one maybe. The one I think about a lot as an example of this is a Catalan writer who writes in Spanish, Eduardo Mendoza, who's written like really like sort of epic historical fiction and kind of wild, silly comedy books and like short poetic little novellas, and just like in terms of mode, it's such variety, and I just find that very appealing. And I think I find it appealing as a reader, and then as a writer, um, I mean, I'm just someone who is kind of peripatetic. Like I'm always moving around, trying different things, wanting to think about something different. I often now not as much because I'm so I've got other things that I'm doing between teaching and global voices and other kinds of work, and that gives me the variety I need. But when I was just the times when I have had more time for writing, I tended to have like two or three manuscripts that I was really working on at a time because I wanted to have, you know, one that felt a little lighter and one that felt more intense and one that was first person and felt very interior and one that was more action, because if I got a little stuck on one, I'd just go to the other and just find the pleasure points in each one. um, to enjoy, stretching my brain in different ways.
That pleasure points
Yeah.
comment is really good, because it's like, yeah, man, sometimes you get bored of something. We're, you know,
It's
Yeah.
we all are attention seeking animals. So
Mhm.
if we can sort of like play different modes to satisfy different parts of our creative brain, then all the better for it.
yeah.
Yeah. And we referenced Infomocracy earlier, laughing that you had pitched it as a novella, but it ended up being your first full-length novel. What was it about that particular story that really, seized you in that moment of your life?
Um, so I mean, I had written other full length novels before. As I said, they probably weren't very good. I don't want to actually say that. I don't know where, but it is very hard with publishing. Like, you really don't know whether it's the quality or whether it's just timing, the particular publisher. So in this case, was going to Tor.com, so it needed to be science fiction. I happened to be writing this science fiction at the time. The reason I pitched it as a novella is not only because they asked for novellas, but also because it was only halfway done. And so,
That's a bold move. Bold move, Malka.
You're like, midpoint climax could be the end, right?
standalone-ish.
Oh my god.
Um, and they were like, "So, how long do you think it'll take you to finish it?" And I was said, well, I know what's going to happen. I did not know what was going to happen. I'm a like inveterate pantser. I never know what's going to happen. So like, yeah, probably 2 months." And I just wrote like nuts for 2 months, and I managed to get them something reasonable enough that we could then edit it. And Carling Laird, who was the editor, was really wonderful with it, and got it to a good place. But it was, even though there was an element of chance of that being the book that got published, I think, it was a book, and it is a book that I care a lot about. It came from a lot of my experience of working internationally, living in a lot of different places, and at the same time feeling really frustrated with and I thought I was frustrated then, but feeling really frustrated with the political system in the States, and seeing similar things also in a lot of the places where I was working or visiting, vacationing, traveling. And so thinking about, like, particularly this contradiction between what we say about democracy and then the way that we consider our nation states and borders, and like who belongs and who doesn't, and who can join and who can leave, and all these questions, and also getting really frustrated with the way our information environment works. And so I had a lot going on in my head of being annoyed with stuff. And I was, at the time, I was working for NGOs. I was, at a reasonable level within an organization, but like not someone who could. I didn't feel like there was a real outlet for me to talk about the ways I was frustrated or make change in the way that I wanted to. And so writing the book and writing it as science fiction gave me a way to imagine a world where it wasn't perfect, but some of the things that were really bugging me would have changed, and changed in interesting ways, not always for the better, but in ways that um, could really highlight the things that I thought and continue to think are just really stupid about the way we organize ourselves. And that's, is really the idea of let's look at this from a different perspective. And I still feel like science fiction is just this really excellent tool for getting people out of their assumptions, and thinking about the ways that things could be different.
And that's a very good teaser for our masterclass next episode. So we're going to be talking all about organization and structures and
Mhm.
systems and networks. But I wanted to get your take on the series, because you said you're a veteran pantser, which makes me think like, how the fuck does she plan a series? So I mean, it's something that a lot of writers really dream of, is like, and is kind of getting harder and harder, as publishers are more and more hesitant to invest in longer series. So it's like trilogy is kind of like the sweet spot. Duology's fantastic, but the fact that you've gotten to finish the Sentinel cycle, the fact that you're currently in the midst of the Mossa and Pleiti, how does it feel for you to kind of like tackle a series? How do you plan out if anything, how you're going to go from like one novel to the next, and just, you know, the idea of the Sentinel cycle, for instance, being a finished series, you finished it, leaving that behind and moving on to something new.
Yeah, when I wrote Infomocracy, I actually fully planned it to be a standalone. I did not have any idea of continuing it. And when the publishers came to me to ask if there would be a sequel, I was initially a little bit hesitant because, as I said before, you know, I tend to write very different things at the same time. And there was part of me that kind of wanted to just go on to something that was quite different, or at least what really worries me is kind of getting stuck in a rut and doing, you know, a slightly different version of the same thing. And but when, you know, when I thought about it a little bit more, I thought that there was actually a lot more in that world to explore. And in particular, if I was going to write something about the future of democracy, I probably shouldn't stop with elections because that's not all that democracy is. It's also about governing. So basically, I found ways to make the sequels exciting for myself as something that was significantly different from the first one. And it was still, you know, as a, really a pantser. And I should say my only experience with not pantsing was when I was writing collaboratively on those serials, and it was great. It was actually a lot of fun to have outlines that we worked out together, and then write through the outline. I was like, wow, this is cool. I'm still not able
This
to.
is efficient. No.
You know, it is. You're like, oh, I know what comes next, but um, I enjoy also being surprised when I'm working on my books that I'm pantsing my way through, and so I hate to give that up. So anyway, with Infomocracy, yeah, I kind of thought, okay, you know, how much time has passed? What's happened? I want to shift the main characters around a little bit because I'm interested in looking at different perspectives on this world, and kind of went for it. With the Mossa and Pleiti series, it's a little bit different because I did come to it with this sort of genre of detective fiction in mind. And, you know, classically, that genre is like a series. It's not a trilogy. There's not, you know, some kind of thing that finishes. They're procedurals. There's a similar pattern in each one, and you go through it. But, you know, again, I still really don't want to be stuck. Um, or have it be kind of dialing it in. I do not want to get to that point. But for me, with these books, like there are two things I think that are really helpful on that with these books. One is that the world building is so much fun. I enjoy the world so much, and there's really a lot of space there for development. You know, I've been trying to have some different parts of it show up in each of the books. There's a lot that is still unexplained, and there's always going to be some unexplained, but I think there's a lot more room still for going into it. And the other thing is the romance part of it, because they are, um, you know, the detective story part is pretty. It's procedurals. I will try to change the shape of the mysteries to the extent I can. But the, you know, romance is a really interesting challenge to do in a series, because usually if you have a series of romance books, it moves from person to person, so you have different romances that can go through that like happy ending. And for me, it's quite interesting to think about like the other parts of a relationship that are after the initial, yes, there's something requited here and we're happy together, and look at how that works. And so that's been another fun thing to go through the series and think like, okay, you know, um, how does a relationship work when it's still kind of new and unsure? Or okay, it's a little more, there's more of a foundation now, but there's still these deep issues between people. And you know, that's something very real to work those out. So between the world building and the, I guess this is, it's the romance is also is really character building in a lot of ways. Um, and you know, mysteries are fun. I do like mysteries, so I'm quite happy to be going on with these books for another. See, I'm working on 4 now, and 5 is under contract, so we'll see after
Amazing.
that.
Awesome. That's awesome. Well, of course, we want to dig more into Mossa and Pleiti, and because your third book in that series, The Potency of Ungovernable Impulses,
You
is
did
out
it.
now. I did it. Woohoo. Can you give us like the brief? I know we mentioned there's romance, there's mystery, but do you have like a brief elevator pitch you can give for either the book or the series as a whole, just for anyone who hasn't read it yet?
Yeah, so these series are set on Jupiter. It's been a couple of hundred years since humanity has basically made Earth unlivable and really desperately managed to escape to this very unlikely place to set up shop again, which is a gas giant planet. And this is made possible by having some rings that are going around the planet geosynchronously and have large platforms on them where things have been built. And it has been hundreds of years. So there's a pretty developed society and culture around this planet now, including a really powerful uh, academic movement, of which there's a large part is the classicists who are looking at how do we figure out ecosystems on Earth so that we can restart them and go back. But there's also modernists who are studying the planet itself, Jupiter, and trying to learn more about this planet that we know very little about, and even then they still know very little about. And there's the speculative faculty, which is people who are imagining things in the future. And so this is this academic thread runs through the books really strongly because one of the main characters, Pleiti, is a classical scholar, and her love interest, Mossa, is an investigator in this world and does things like finding people who are missing or looking into people who have disappeared or trying to help people who have some kind of mysterious problem facing them. And so the books are in part about the two of them solving these mysteries together, and in part are about, um, yeah, having a really big problem with your living circumstances and thinking about fixing it in different ways, thinking about going back to the way things were before, thinking about making things better, thinking about living in different ways than we did in the past, um, and our responsibility to our environment. So there's all this stuff going on in the background, and then you have these like very fun and hopefully affirming mysteries.
But I love that. I love that combination. It's like the really, really rich world building that you've just described. And I think the attention that you put into building the fabric of that future Jupiter colony really helps to um sustain these fascinating mysteries. And this is very much like in a Holmesian kind of mystery vein. You have the two partners and they have their particular relationship, but it's also kind of like the scope of it feels very intimate, which is something that I enjoyed about the Sherlock Holmes mysteries, and the fact that right now we're seeing the rise in popularity of like cozy and cozy science fiction and stuff like that. So this fits this beautiful mold of, you have the cozy mystery and you have the cozy sci-fi, the world building, the setting, and all this kind of stuff, and they fuse so beautifully together in this series. And at the core of it is like Mossa and Pleiti, obviously, but I want to get your take on cozy fiction and why you think like cozy fiction speaks to so many people right now, what sci-fi can kind of add to that mix.
Yeah, I mean, I will say first of all that I really think people should read whatever they like reading, and I think that even if we kind of shifted a little to the classic debate between utopian and dystopian, I think both of these are super important. Like, you need things to aspire to, and you need warnings. And some people find one really resonant, and some people just need the other. And sometimes that changes in the same person over time. Certainly for me, it has. So nothing I'm saying should be taken in any way as telling people what they should read or enjoy. Like, read and enjoy what you like. But for me, at least, there's certainly times when, like, the nonfiction out in the world is just so terrible that you need some fiction that's. I actually don't completely love the word cozy, even though I do make a
These
lot of
lovely
use of.
marketing terms that
Yeah.
that just get slapped
Yeah,
on.
I mean, I think there was this existing cozy mystery genre that bears some relations to this, but and that I sometimes really enjoy. And but for me, I was thinking much more about comforting. Like, what are the books that I go to when I just need a break. And not just a break, but also something that is like recharging and reinvigorating, particularly in dealing with bad stuff out there. And that's why I do try to make a distinction between cozy and comforting because, and I've written about this elsewhere, but a lot of the books that find for me in this category are books that are quite violent and not always, you know, that's not always tempered exactly. So, like, Murderbot is a really good example. I
Is
think
Murderbot considered cozy sci-fi?
I don't know.
Do
For
some
me,
people
it is comforting, and that's why I say like I'm drawing a little bit of a distinction here because
right.
you know, it's it doesn't fit all of the things that we would have in the original sort of cozy mystery genre, certainly. It's not always cozy, but for me, like something about that voice and the consciousness of injustice and the competence at fighting it. These are things that to me are extremely comforting to read. Um, and so it's definitely a place that I go when I can't handle it, right? And there are a number of other books like that. And as I say, you can find my recommendations everywhere. And I've actually been fortunate enough to be able to do a couple of panels with some of my top comforting writers, which is Martha Wells, KJ Charles, and T. Kingfisher, and like Ursula Vernon. And so like
Ursula's like
The best.
so hilarious. She's amazing.
I love her.
and also not exactly what you'd call cozy all the time.
Yeah.
No. I mean,
And
again,
KJ Charles,
depends on what you find to be
Yeah.
comforting. Yeah.
exactly. KJ Charles writes romances. Some of them are fairly fluffy. There's usually a body count. Like it's, but but they're also, very conscious of like, as I said, injustice or who are the people that you need to read about having more power and the people you need to read about having less power, right? Because this is what we're looking for succor from. This is what we're looking for a respite from is the power imbalances in the world and the injustice that's going on. And so reading a book that recognizes that, does not hand wave it away, recognizes that there's difficulty, but finds ways for the characters to fight it into some degree of success, I think is very comforting. And as I said about Murderbot, voice is critical. Like having a character that I can get into their head and just feel comfortable there, this is gold. So so this is what I was trying to do with the books. I wrote the first book um in sort of middle late 2020. So a tough time just for everybody. And was really thinking about the books that I was rereading over and over again in that difficult period as a way of continuing to do the things that I needed to do in my life, and thinking about how I could write something that would be the same experience for myself while writing it. And so, mysteries were a big thing of that. I think it has to do with the resolution. It has to do with having a puzzle that draws you in and keeps you very focused on the book as opposed to all the horrors going on outside in the world. Romance, similarly, you have something that's um, treating emotions as something important, which I think is we don't get enough of actually in our society as it is, and that looks at similarly kind of problems that are going to get resolved, but in the best ones you don't always know how until you get to it. And then academia, maybe because I'm at least partially in academia myself, and so those books are always kind of fun and fascinating that they're doing a take on the workplace. And as you said, Sherlock Holmes, for some reason for me, Sherlock Holmes takes are absolute catnip. I don't know why. I see something come up that's like this new take on Sherlock Holmes. Yes, I want to at least try it. And I think as you
Hard
say,
same.
yeah, right? And it's curious because also when I went back and I reread a lot of the Sherlock Holmes as I was working on these books, and some of them are quite good and have some good points, and some of them are just like either he's just so awful to Watson, which I dislike, or to other people in general, or some of them, the kinds of mysteries and problems seem very ridiculous to us in our current world. So they're quite interesting to read in this way, but also there have just been some really marvelous takes on it. Sherry Thomas's series of Lady Sherlock, I think, does really amazing things with the subgenre. I've been a fan of Laurie King's Mary Russell and Sherlock Holmes books for decades now, and I think that there's really something critical to this what you mentioned about the two characters who work together and have kind of different um, ways that their brains work, and seeing this work together is it feels really really great. So that's I was thinking about all these things and just I was like, I'm gonna stuff them all in one novella and I'm gonna have a really escapist good time writing it. And of course I was, halfway through this novella and I was like, oh my gosh, this is actually about pandemic lockdowns, isn't it? Oh crap. Climate change. It's also about the way that, making me more worried about climate change. And oh my god. But fortunately, I had put so much comforting and cozy into it at that point that I was able to continue writing.
It's like the reality that creeps in cannot overwhelm the comforting escapism of the story itself.
I try it because they really are, literally post-apocalyptic books. They're just far enough,
but they're cozy.
Yeah. It's beneath the surface.
That's right.
It's subcontext.
Like the mystery of the interior of Jupiter.
Damn, Greta. There you go.
But let's talk about like your Sherlock and Watson, because we just love Mossa and Pleiti. Like, how did you land on these two as not only your investigative duo, but truly the emotional core of the books and the series as a whole?
Oh gosh, that's such a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think with characters who are really central to the books, it tends to come from me, in terms of thinking about parts of myself, because um, this makes it easier to feel authentic about it, to feel like it's, I know how they're feeling because I'm imagining parts of myself or myself at different times. And so I kind of tried to blend that with some of the directions from the Holmes canon or versions of it. I think with Mossa, I tend to think a lot about how she interacts with other people, along the lines of Holmes. That and the new book was trying to delve into some of the also ways that Sherlock Holmes, has these he has these moods that are really impinge on his ability to function, and so thinking about that, um, and filtering it again through my experience. And Pleiti is the other part of me, the part that's um, more able to deal with people, but also, I mean, I'm still I'm always a nerd, and I have my, the things that I'm just super interested in and want to study. This is why I'm also partly an academic, and just lean into that side for a bit when I'm writing Pleiti. So yeah, just really parts of myself and trying to figure out, what in these other books that I love so much resonates with those parts of myself, and why I enjoy them, and then tapping into that to try and write this.
Yeah, and I love that, like, it's basically like writing two protagonists. It really allows you to I mean, it's one of the greatest sort of tools of being a writer, not just on the page, but also like for ourselves, to be able to kind of better understand the different parts of ourselves and how they fit together. And like the fact that Mossa and Pleiti are both um, deep down, like different parts of you being represented on the page is so cool. And it's also really beautiful to see their relationship develop. The fact that you have this romance at the core of the series. And how have you kind of um you mentioned a little bit earlier, but like played around with the idea of romance, the idea of relationships and intimacy over the course of the series and kind of coming into book 3?
Yeah, I think, as I said, I read a fair amount of romance, and it's really interesting, very similar to mysteries in a lot of ways, that there's so many different shapes that romance can take. The people who meet and have the attraction straight off, and then they have to figure out the rest of it, or the people who figure out the rest of it first and then the attraction is a surprise, or long-term friends and then something comes out, and just all kinds of different ways that relationships can develop and then continue. And um, so with these books, I was thinking a lot about kind of the maturity and work that goes into having a relationship with someone, and how bad I was at that when I was a lot younger. And so so I have
How
this
bad
sense.
we all are. None of us are
Well,
Yeah.
good. None of us are
it's
good.
hard. It's hard. And I think a lot of the romance that we see, and by romance, I mean also the sort of casual romance subplot that you see in almost every movie, right? I mean, there are a couple that skip it, but uh, I was really struck actually at one point when I was doing a bit of research on detective stories, and there was this definition of like the classical of what the detective genre means from like way back in like 1900 or something. It was like, and it has no romance. And I thought about all the detective books now where like there's some where there's no, but usually that subplot is there because it's almost expected.
And even in like hard-boiled fiction, there's, you know, the romance is, I mean, from today's standards, quite creepy, but it's there.
Yes, yes,
It's prominent, yeah.
From the dame walking into the office
Right.
with legs for days. Like, that's romance. Come on.
Yeah.
exactly.
Bright
No,
red
it
lips.
is, or at least sex appeal or something. And like in the Sherlock Holmes, I mean, I think it's, I mean, the first one has this kind of sad past romance that is the motivation for everything. And the second one, already you have Watson falling in love like this with someone, of course. So goofy. But but and now it's just it's really, really common. And a lot of these romances don't tell us anything about the work or the not just work, but like emotional maturity of that you have to have with yourself, or um, ways of compromising, or thinking about the way that different people are different and need different kind of languages, or so whenever I see something that feels like it's kind of missing in our media landscape, it's always something I want to dig into a little bit more. And so with these books, the one of the ways I address that is like they had a relationship some years before when they were in school, and it did not work because, like, Mossa in particular is I think a bit of a difficult person, and Pleiti has her things too, and so that they were coming back to it, and both kind of expect, well, that's over, it's not gonna, it didn't work, it's not gonna work, and find that they have both changed and are able to give it another try, and have it be a different result this time. And going through the books, as I said, after the first one where you have that kind of great moment of like, oh yes, the yearning can be fulfilled, but then in the next book, I think um most people do not kind of accept right away, oh yeah, this is done, this is it, and the other person definitely feels the same way and we're all set. There's a lot of uncertainty. I think for these characters, figuring out some of the different kinds of communication or reassurance, or there's one scene in the second book where Pleiti is feeling uncomfortable with a little bit of kind of a phobia, and Moss is trying to comfort her the way she would want to be comforted, by like talking through all the exact issues of why this is not something she should worry about. And Pleiti's like internally like, just hug me. So there's some of these conflicts that I think can be really important, and
Yep.
you don't see that much. So trying to go into some of that with these two and show how they're learning, and in the third book, um, also, I think the closer you get to someone, the less able you are to really hide some of the deeper, more difficult emotional stuff, and that's starting to come out with the third book, which was really interesting to write. So I hope people um, find that it rings true with them.
The
Well, speaking of
complicated
that, I mean,
language of love.
Yeah, and like relationships aging. But winding down, like, are there any particular aspects of book 3 that you just can't wait for audiences to read? Anything you can share without being too spoilery?
Of course, there are. A lot of them are either a lot of them are puns or wordplay, though, which you can't really talk about without spoiling, but I hope people find them and enjoy them. There's a lot of fun things I got to do. They go to a different university, and there's one thing I did really want to do with the third book, because the books can get very tightly focused on these two characters, is expanded a little bit more. So they have more interaction with some friends in these that uh they become fuller characters as well. So and that means they get to do all sorts of cool stuff, like go to a karaoke slam and go to a cling rail game, which is a kind of sport that they have developed in this society, and which is very rah rah universities. And
Do they have the mascot and everything?
gosh, I didn't think of a mascot. I'll have to think about that next one, but they do have school colors. Uh, and so, gosh, what would a mascot be in a place where there are actually no animals indigenously?
You could use my high school's mascot, the laser.
What?
Ooh,
Exactly. What
That's
is the correct question?
were the eyes on like the little thing that generates the laser, or was it just the skin
It
interesting.
was
the
Is it just
it
a
was
eyes?
just
laser
like I
beam?
think like a lightning bolt kind of thing,
I'm just
but it was a
imagining I'm
laser.
just imagining a costume that looks like a giant red Crayola
Yeah, I cannot. Yeah.
kind of thing. Way to go, Greta's high school, making no fucking sense. Oh my god. Well, that sounds amazing. I'm really really excited to read book 3. I'm excited for everyone to get their hands on it, and I'm glad that like 5 books. You got 2 more books
That's
in
so
in the tank,
exciting.
so I'm really excited for this to continue. But Malco, closing out, I just have 2 questions for you. If you can give us a good bit of soundbite writing advice, and B, a weird or random fact that you find to be utterly fascinating.
Yes. Okay. So, writing advice. I'm going to go with kind of the theme that we've been talking about, which is write something that's fun for you. Write something that makes you want to write it. I think, they always say, like, write what you know. For a long time, I will say, write what you miss, because that's the place you want to spend time. And so, write stuff that you want, write characters you want to spend time with, and places you want to spend time in, whether that's because they're uncomfortable and dangerous or because they're cozy and comforting. Either way, right where you want to be.
I love that. And do you have a weird or random fact for us?
Weird random fact. There are so many good, weird, random facts that I'm just going to have to think for a second which one I want to do. I feel like I just saw one recently that was really good. And of course, it's like totally gone now. Um, hmm. If you asked me lots of questions, I'm sure I would come up with some amazing,
What
really
about
random.
a weird or random fact about Jupiter?
Well, yes. I mean, I will not claim to be an expert on Jupiter. But I will say, one thing that I had to deal with the books is that even though Jupiter is way bigger than Earth, and the year for the time it takes to go around the sun, because it's so far, is obviously super long, the day is actually really short. So Jupiter spins really fast. So it gets through a night and a day in about 10 hours.
Oh wow.
Um,
Oof.
yes, which, I was like, oh dear, how are we going to deal with this? Um, so I figured out ways to try to think about how society would face that,
How
in the
humans can figure out like how to not
how
totally
to
fuck up their
Yeah,
circadian
go
rhythm.
crazy.
totally their diurnal setup. Um,
Oh man.
yeah,
Very cool. Well, Malcolm, thank you so much for chatting with Greta and I today. It's been an absolute pleasure and so good to see you again.
great to see you too. Thank you so much.
Of course. And if anyone wants to support Malka, also in turn support people out there in need through the purchasing of her books, you can pick up books 1, 2, and 3 in Mossa and Pleiti series. You can also check out the Sentinel Cycle. Go check out Ninth Step Station. Go check out Malka's short stories. There are many ways to support this incredible human being. And Malka, if you could please let everyone know where they can find you online.
Yeah, these days I'm mostly on Blue Sky, where my handle is just very simply @older. I also spend a little bit of time on Mastodon, and really, yeah, not a whole lot anywhere else these days. But I'm technically on Instagram at Infomocracy. But yeah, mostly come see me at Blue Sky, and you'll see. You can also, if you want to hear from me weekly, you can sign up for the weekly newsletter Global Voices, which I write and curate.
Awesome. And the website for Global Voices, is that globalvoices.org?
That's right.
All right, perfect. We'll throw that in the links as well, so you can find that in the description below. As well, you can also follow SFF Addicts across the board at SFF Addicts Pod. You can find me at Adrian M. Gibson. You can go check out if you're in for mysteries, mine's full of much higher death count and lots of mushrooms. But Mushroom Blues, if you want to take a look at that. Greta, what about you?
Yeah, I'm at Greta K. Kelly on all the things, and you can go check out Queen of Days for your daily dose of a bunch of fuck-ups, fucking things up. Heists and hijinks.
Bravo. That was your best one yet. All right. And go support MJ and her cats, the Thorin Food Fund. What's the name of her kitten? I can't remember.
Evie.
Evie. Yeah. After Evie from The Mummy. So go support Thorin and Evie by buying Among Thieves and Thick as Thieves. And that's it for this episode. Stay tuned next week for part 2 with Malka for our writing masterclass on future power structures and systems. Until then, keep reading, keep imagining, and we'll see you next time on SFF Addicts.